Now it is time to introduce our main speaker, Cindy.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Hi, my name is Cindy Coleman, and I'm an alcoholic. I want to thank my crippled committee people for helping me get up here. Thank my friend Tina for coming with me, and my friend Clay, and my boyfriend Adam. And I want to thank Joy for asking me to come and share with you tonight and wish a happy birthday to the birthday people. It was interesting to hear a couple of people that got here so young. My sobriety date is March 10th of 1977. So you don't have to do the math, that's 34 years. And I'm only 26 years old. So that's the miracle of AA. Yeah, I got sober when I was 2. I had no idea I would stay here 34 years, let alone 34 days. I don't know about you, but sobriety never looked like a real answer. When I'm sober, I'm what is described in the big book as restless, irritable, and discontent. And I have some unusual reaction to alcohol that most of you in here would identify with, but when I drink the right amount of Southern Comfort, I love you. So I drink for what it does for you, you know. It makes you lovable. I want to throw my arms around you and rock with you and tell you how much you mean to me and talk about the meaning of the universe, and I want to weep for hours. And I love feeling that way. I just don't feel that way when I'm sober. You know, so when I get the right amount of whiskey in me, it's just like taking a good, deep breath. My sponsor, Chuck C., used to say, I could not integrate myself into society. And that's the way I felt. You know, I just couldn't make myself fit. I am half Eskimo, and the other half is mostly German, a little bit of Irish in there, which I'm sure you can tell by looking at me. But you know, there were not a lot of Eskimos in San Bernardino, and there are none now. It's a horrible, ugly place, and it was awful growing up there. I knew I was an Eskimo princess that got on an ice floe that was just kicked out a little too far from shore, you know? And I hated that place, and it was horrible then, and it was smoggy. I mean, we had to watch TV all the time for first stage smog alerts, and your lungs hurt when you walk to school. It was just awful. When I was growing up, my dad was a probation officer, and he handled drunk drivers as his caseload. And he decided one afternoon that he should go to an AA meeting because he was sending all of his clients there, and he's been sober ever since. My mom left before I was 3 years old, and she went back to Alaska, where she lives now. So I grew up with my dad and my 2 full brothers. And my dad, he's German, and he's got the fairest skin you ever saw. And he's got very light blue eyes, kind of looks like Paul Newman. And I was not aware of the fact that I looked different than him until I went to school. And at school, the kids would make fun of me. You know, they'd call me, you know, a Jap and a chink and, all these just horrible names. And I grew to hate the way that I looked. And I hate that my eyes were slanted, and I'd come home from school and I'd sit on the edge of my bed and try to stretch them out, so they'd become round. And it worked. But I started smoking dope, and they just kind of shrunk right back up. And by the end of the party, everybody looked like me anyway, so. When I came to AA, I knew nobody could possibly hate me more than I did. Had so much self-hatred, and I drank with my brothers, and they're both sober now, and they need to be. But oh my God, we just got in so much trouble. I love seeing the families come here and give cakes to people because, I didn't have this big life when I was drinking. I had a very small world, and my drinking just affected a small number of people. But I'll tell you, what I did was I broke my dad's heart over and over and over again. Dr. Silkworth describes this in the big book. He says, people like you are too heartbreaking. And that's the kind of drinker I am. My dad was getting sober and going to AA meetings. My brothers and I were ripping up the city of Riverside now, and just drinking and getting in trouble. We were stealing things, stealing cars, rolling cars, getting in accidents, and my poor dad. My mother, she's called herself an alcoholic, so I guess I could say it. She is a periodic alcoholic. That's not the kind of drinker I am. I like to drink all the time. Like, I can't get more than 3 days sober by myself, and it's just too much sobriety. But anyway, my mom, I guess, could not acclimate to San Bernardino from her small village below the Arctic Circle. And I don't know if you know any native drinkers, but we don't drink well. And there are no, to my knowledge anyway, social drinkers that are native. We're either full-blown alcoholics or we don't drink at all. It's kind of like no in between. And anyway, so my mom went to Alaska. My dad had us kids, and we were drinking and getting in trouble. The last time that I got drunk, I remember my dad sitting me down, and he told me that he was taking David to an AA meeting. David was 2 months older than I am, and I had met him in 2 of the Alateen meetings that I went to. That's all I went to. They kicked me out because I was drinking. And I remember David, though. And my dad said, why don't you go with us? We're going to go hear a man named Chuck C. talk. And Chuck hasn't had a drink in, I think it was like 30 years. And I could not think of anything less interesting to do than go listen to someone who hasn't had a drink in 30 years. And so my dad got his first job in sobriety. It was Kellogg Mental Institution, graveyard shift, running the adolescent unit. And it was fantastic because we had a party at our house every night. And my dad would go to his AA meeting. From the AA meeting, he would go to work. He would come home the next morning, and there'd just be kids like passed out all over the place because we were all partying all night. Anyway, this particular evening, he didn't have to work, so he was taking David to go hear Chuck C. talk. And 2 girls came over that I hadn't seen in quite a while, and they brought with them a fifth of Southern Comfort. And I drank mine. I drank what was left in the bottle. And Then I grabbed this girl's half a glass, and I knew that I couldn't hold it and sit down at the same time, so I carefully placed it on the arm of this couch and chair that was sitting next to each other, and as I sat down, I knocked it over. And I just started crying, because that was the last of the booze. Now, I was not anywhere near reality in my thinking, so it didn't dawn on me I could get more or steal more or somebody could bring more. That just was the last of the booze. And I was crying really hard, and I went into a blackout that lasted 3 days. And at some point during that blackout, I decided that I was overwhelmed with love for my little brother. My little brother and I used to get in fistfights all the time. So I was struck with this deep, profound love for him, and I wanted to go find him and tell him. And I knew he was over at Riverside City College. It was like a block from our house. And driving around with the security guard, smoking pot while they looked for illegal activity. And when I went out there to go find him, this time they were there, and they had a cannon, and they were firing this cannon at me over and over and over. And I had little chips of rock and glass that were lodged in my face, and I would wipe my face off, and as soon as I did, they would like fire another load at me. And I'd found out later I was just climbing up a real steep hill, and with my dead drunken weight, I just kept going face down into the ground over and over. Anyway, somehow I got to the top of that hill, and in the alley behind our house, my little brother and his best friend were lying against the garbage cans, and their shirts were ripped, and they had chains wrapped around their necks. And my little brother's best friend's brother was standing there, and he said the gang came by and took care of him. And I just started sobbing. And after a minute, they hopped up and said, oh, we're just kidding. And they had ketchup all over everywhere. But, you know, I was so drunk, I thought he was still dead. And so they're, you know, eating the ketchup, they're shaking me, they're trying to get me to come around, and I was into the grief, you know. So they take me in the house, my older brother's inside, and he starts punching me in the face so that I can see clearly. And they didn't know what to do with me. So I was thrown up. I threw up almost every time I drank. You know, I have any number of humiliating experiences that are enough to keep normal drinkers from ever drinking that much. But that never deters me from drinking that much, because once I start, I cannot control the amount I'm going to drink. And anyway, I just was throwing up everywhere. I took off my clothes, and my brothers threw me in the bedroom and closed the door. Well, my dad came home after the meeting because he didn't have to work that night, and he had just taken David, a newcomer. He just heard Chuck C talk, so he's feeling really spiritual. And he had asked the kids, where's Cindy? And they said, she's got a headache. And he went into my room, and I had eaten that night. I hadn't eaten for a few days. I had spaghetti. So I was lying in this sea of pasta, and I had long hair then like I do now, so it was just like, you know, it was starting to harden. And my dad carried me out into the living room, you know, and asked these kids, what's wrong with her? And they said, she's got a headache. He thought I had taken a bunch of pills, and I was not a pillhead. I don't think drugs were quite so popular like in the mid-'70s, nowhere near as much as they are now. But you know, I just never really did drugs. And my dad thought I had taken a bunch of pills and overdosed. And didn't take pills, because they're dangerous, and they can kill you. So he threw me in the car and rushed me over to Riverside Community Hospital, and they started to pump my stomach, and I did it for myself, all over my dad, all over the doctor, all over the hospital room, just pasta everywhere. And I looked like I had been terribly beaten up because of that walk I had gone on earlier and was being attacked with the cannon, and then my brother punching me in the face, and so I just looked like a wreck. And the doctor just said to my dad, "Look, Mr. Steckdob, your daughter is obviously trying to kill herself, and she's not far away from doing that. We're going to put a 72-hour hold on her, and then we're going to send her over to Kellogg Mental Institution. They've got a great adolescent unit there." And my dad said, "I know, I run it." And he brought me home. A couple days later, I came out of that blackout for the last time, and I was being shoved into the back of the Chevy Nova and being driven from Riverside to Pomona to the Triangle Club for my first meeting. And I sat in the back of that meeting, and I was shaking and sweating and vomiting. And I don't remember anything that was said. I got sober 2 months before my 16th birthday. And there were not a lot of young people at that time in AA. And there were some people that weren't particularly thrilled about my being there. But my dad said, I was 15 going on 93, because I was just old and tired and beaten up. And I stayed active in AA, but didn't really get into the recovery portion for a good chunk of time in AA. And I don't think it was so much out of rebellion. I think it just didn't sink in or something. I'm not sure what it was in retrospect, but going to a lot of meetings saved my life, and it kept me here long enough so that I could find the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was really relatively surrendered for about the first 6 months of my sobriety, maybe 9 months, and then my ego woke up and didn't give me peace for a lot of years in AA. I had 9 sponsors in my first 2 years of sobriety. On sponsor number 10, I don't know what the difference was, but I'm halfway? Thank you. That was good timing. I just got sober. I started using her, and I had her for 2 years, and she changed my life. She said, "You're like me. You're the kind of person that leaves 5 minutes before the miracle happens." And she said, "What I want you to do is I want you to unpack your stuff where you're staying." And I said, "Well, I don't know. I don't want to take up that much room." And she said, "How much stuff do you have?" I said, "I've got a whole box full." And she said, "Well, I don't think Janet will mind. Why don't you just go ahead and unpack it? And that way, next time you feel like leaving town, it'll take you 5 minutes to pack your stuff up. And maybe in that 5 minutes, you will have already established the habit of calling me, and you'll make a call before you take off." And my relationship with this woman just started to change my life. But at 2 years sober, I was just obnoxious and hostile and angry, prime relationship material. So I started glancing at him from across the room. And the second his girlfriend went to Hawaii, I made my move. And she was an Al-Anon, so I figured she could just release him. And we broke up and got back together about 18 times for the group, give them something to talk about at coffee. And anyway, he was sober, I guess, about 6.5 years, and he went out and drank. And fortunately for me, I had something a little bit stronger than my obsession for him, and that was a commitment to a home group and to my sponsor and to AA. And I think that saved me. He was gone out of AA for about a year, and he started coming back to the rooms, and we started glancing at each other from across the room, and I got pregnant. So we were engaged for 13 days, and I had always hated children, and I would hear them cry in restaurants, and I would think, oh, God, why don't they just smack that thing? And I was real nervous as to what kind of mother I would become, and so was everybody who knew me. But an odd thing happened. I just fell in love with this baby inside of me. I could not wait to meet him. So deep in love. And on September 24th in 1986, Daniel was born. And when Daniel was born, he came out, he was screaming his head off. And the first thought that crossed my mind was, let me hold him so I can make him feel better. And I'd never felt that way about anything in my entire life. And he's such a fantastic human being. So he's 25, and I have a 3-year-old granddaughter. And one of my friends was like, oh my God, don't you hate being called grandma? I'm like, oh, it's the best word in the world, I just love it. Anyway, John stayed sober, I guess, for about a year. When Daniel was a year old, he went back out, and he never stayed sober again after that. He could never put any time together, 30 days and 60 days and 30 days and 90 days. And in 1997, he choked on his vomit during an overdose and died. And it was 2 weeks before our son's 11th birthday. And I don't think that I wanted AA any more than he did. I don't think I loved our son any more than he did. I don't know what it is that makes one person sober and someone else not sober. We get theories sometimes about what keeps somebody sober. I don't know what it is. But anyway, getting Daniel through that first 3 years after John's death was just hell. And at that time, I had happened to go back to school, which is something I always wanted to do. So we were living in Iowa at the time. And it was about that time that Dan started watching the Star Wars trilogy, the first one, the older one. And one time we were sitting in the car in the parking lot, and he said, yeah, my dad reminds me, or R2-D2 reminds me of my dad. And R2-D2 is the trash can looking guy. And C-3PO was, the brass gold droid who was fluent in over 6,000 languages. And he said my dad was like R2-D2. He just didn't have a C-3PO in this world. And I thought about it, and I thought that really describes what happens here in Alcoholics Anonymous for us. I come in here with all my bleeps and whistles that don't make sense to anybody but you people. And for some reason, you can interpret those things and give me marching orders and send me back out into the world. And the odd thing is that after doing this for so many years, when you give me those marching orders and send me back out, it integrates me into society, which is the very thing that I always wanted. I mean, that's what whiskey did for me. It made me feel integrated. And the actions of Alcoholics Anonymous, the plan of recovery that we have here, actually integrates me back into society. And it makes me a useful person. The last few years I've had just terrible health problems, and I don't really talk about them a lot, but we're getting to the bottom of it. I guess my spinal column is disintegrating or something. I'm not exactly sure what's happening, but Adam has been such a champion for me, and makes me laugh all the time. But, my days sometimes, even at 34 years sober, are extremely dark. They're so dark, sometimes I just don't get the point of it. And even today, I haven't wanted to kill myself for about 7 hours, I guess. But even in talking to somebody else, and I was talking to one of my girlfriends on the phone today, it's like all I have to do is Friday. When I think about the whole rest of my life and what it might entail and what might happen, I know I can't do it. But I know Friday I'm supposed to be over here because Joey invited me here, and that's what I'm supposed to do, is just live it a day at a time. When my sponsor, number 10, moved away, I got Clancy to be my sponsor, and Clancy has been my sponsor for more than 30 years. Which when I say that out loud, it sounds so crazy to have a relationship that long, but he's been my sponsor for more than 30 years. And it was so crazy when he first started sponsoring me. Highly emotional, extremely intense. I told you my mother went out of my life before I was 3, so I have no conscious recollection of her. And I met her when I was 1 year sober, because my dad was sober in AA and he works the AA program. He made amends to her and she came back into our lives. And I completely mishandled it at 1 year sober. So years later, I read my inventory to Clancy, and he, as a part of my 9th step, had me start writing my mother once a month. And it made absolutely no sense to me, because if you had asked me if I wanted a relationship with her, I would have said no. And it would have felt like the truth. But he had me write her. I kept writing her. I didn't feel like it, and it started off by saying to Amy, because Amy is her name, and it would say from Cindy, because I'm Cindy. And then slowly it was like, Dear Amy, and then Sincerely Cindy. And a few years later, then we sat down and I made a face-to-face amends with her for how I had treated her when I met her. And at the end of that, when I asked what could I do to set this right, she said, well, you can call me Mom. Maybe I would have gotten around to that at some point, and probably not. But I said, okay, I can do that. And I said, what else can I do? She said, well, at the end of our telephone conversation, you can say, I love you. I said, okay. I wasn't a big I love you kind of person. And I I started calling her mom, and I started saying, I love you, before we hung up on the telephone. And my mother is an active part of my life. And if you had asked me if that was something I wanted, I didn't even know that I wanted it. And I always think about what Chuck C. used to say, this is not a self-help program. This is a selfless program. I don't need to have greater self-worth. I don't need a better self-image. I don't need to think better thoughts about myself. What I need is to not think about myself. And our book talks about it, that we cannot differentiate the true from the false. And that meant even sober, I could not tell the true from the false. And the truth seemed like I did not want my mom in my life, and that wasn't the truth. When I got done reading my inventory to Clancy, he said, you remind me so much of myself. You care so much that you don't care. And I said, no, sir, I really don't care. And that's what it felt like. That felt like the truth. I don't care. But the truth is I care so much, I can't stand it. I can't stand how much I care about things. I can't stand how deeply I care about things. And I definitely think I'm much more surrendered to that now than I ever have been. I haven't worked for a while because of my health, but before I stopped working, I had gotten this job as a flight attendant. I don't think I can say the company name, but we flew to Alaska a lot. And I remember in training, they had like this mock setup of an airplane filled with passengers, and they wanted us to demonstrate how well we had been trained in emergency situations. So everybody got assigned a different disaster of some sort. And I had to handle a mother with an infant in the exit row, which is a big no-no. And we were trained that what you do when you walk up to somebody and you want them to do something that you want them to do, that they don't want to do, what you do is you present them with that option to do what you want them to do, and then you give them a choice, and the choice is something really horrible. And then so you ask them, it's to deal with people like us, So I had to go get this mother and baby out of the exit row, and I said, well, and then you're supposed to smile when you're done talking with the people, like you care. And so I walked up to this mother, and I said, ma'am, safety is our priority here, and we would like you to be safe, and we would like you to be comfortable. So would you like to move back a couple of rows where you and your child would be safe? Or would you like me to put that baby in the overhead bin? Thank you. For some reason, they hired me, and it was great. I got to go back to the village where my mom grew up, and there's about 700 people in that village now, with about 200 teeth, and Native drinkers, boy, I'm telling you, it's a very interesting experience, and my mom is number 9 of 21 kids. Long winter nights. But when I went to the village, Unalakleet, I got to meet my Uncle Fred, and he was just fantastic, because that whole way of living, and I always thought because I was a half-breed, the whole problem was I was not supposed to be in San Bernardino, which really nobody should be. But I just don't fit in with all these white people. That's the problem. And I thought I needed to go back to my native roots, But I've read so many books about my culture, and they always say, Eskimos are the happiest people on the planet. And, a few of them explained why that is, because you have to be where you are. We have like over 50 words for snow because the kind of snow it is, your life depends upon knowing what kind it is. So, and up there in the village, feeling is not fact. They have a very distinct separation. And the truth is I couldn't afford to live the native way because I would have been swept away by the river, because my mind is always in, oh, well, when I see her, I'm going to tell her, oh, well, he shouldn't have done that, there you go, right down the river, So it was good I ended up in San Bernardino. But I remember I went on summer solstice and I couldn't sleep because, the sun never set. And I went over to my Uncle Fred's, and we're eating blubber and seal oil and, all the goods. And I said, I just couldn't sleep. And he said, you weren't tired. And I said, oh, no, I was exhausted. I just couldn't sleep. He said, if you were tired, you would have slept. That was it. Like, there was a difference between feeling tired and being tired. But I'm someone who's a feeling worshiper. It talks about it in We Agnostics. And I have to wrap it all up. If you're new, it doesn't even matter what I said. New people you don't remember any of it anyway. It's like when you're new, you see white lights blinking over people's heads. That's how you know you're in fit spiritual condition. You quit seeing these blinking lights, The actions in Alcoholics Anonymous, my sponsor, sponsoring people, I have a core of intimate, loving, fantastic relationships. It's all the very thing that I was looking for in the bottle. Dr. Jung, who was instrumental in the beginnings of Alcoholics Anonymous, not an alcoholic, said the one thing that all alcoholics are looking for is unity. And that's what I have here with you. I can bond with you in a deep and intimate way quickly. All we have to know is someone's in AA and you're just linked in. So if you're new, just come back, get a sponsor, get a home group. And thank you so much for having me here tonight.